Hi there, gang. I'm Captain JLS. This is the first installment of my ongoing rambling freeform review of the ongoing Titan Comics Robotech comic book series. We're going to be doing this in 10-minute bursts for the foreseeable future until I reach some sort of conclusion here. So today's basically going to be background and a certain amount of my initial impressions from back when this all started, and some of my impressions as of right now. So this series began, as I'm sure you well know, in the summer of 2017. Copies were initially made available at San Diego Comic-Con 2017. Some comic book stores actually got it the last week of July 2017, and the rest got it first week of August. The original creative team was Brian Wood writing and Marco Trini on art. Now, back when DC, through their Wildstorm imprint, had the Robotech comic license, I kept thinking, if they really want to do Robotech again, they need to get some kind of a name attached to it. And what is some kind of a name? He's a guy who's been around for about 20 years now. Got his start, as I recall, on the tail end of Marvel's Generation X, which was, at that point, still the junior class of X-Men book. He's gone on to do work on Star Wars, do work on Conan, do work on, the proper X-Men book, and he has had a number of creator-owned titles. And most of his creator-owned work has, by and large, had a non-superhero bent. It's been more female-focused, more real-world focused, or at least sort of, to borrow the old Marvel phrase, sort of world outside your window kind of fantasy, except without, the tights that come with being a Marvel or DC superhero book. And it was that sort of more grounded approach that actually appealed to me, seeing Wood take on the Robotech material. Unfortunately, Wood only stuck around for the first 4 issues of Robotech, and then sort of had an outline or a rough plot for how he wanted the next 4 to go. And then the baton got passed to Simon Furman. Yes, Transformers writer Simon Furman, which is how he's going to be billed, pretty much until the day he dies. Furman, of course, became known for Transformers, writing the bi-weekly Transformers book in the UK, and then came over to basically do the final run, 56 through 80 of Transformers US for Marvel. He did the 12 issues of Transformers Generation 2 for Marvel a few years later, and then he did various Transformers comics for Dreamwave and then IDW. I got that signed in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when he was doing an event for Dreamwave right before that whole thing collapsed. That was a cool moment. But the thing is, if you'd said to me, even before that, around that time, hey, Captain, Simon Furman is going to be writing the Robotech ongoing. First of all, I would have said, you're nuts. And second, I would have said, oh my god, worlds are colliding. And there's still a little sense of that. There's still a little feeling of that. This run of Transformers, 56 through 80, is one of the formative texts of my childhood. It's one of those things I go back and reread every year, every couple of years. In much the same way that the first dozen episodes of Robotech are one of the formative audiovisual texts, so to speak, of my childhood that I go back and revisit, every couple of years. To have, Simon Furman here, reinterpreting that today, it's just really weird. That said, that really brings me to the thing I still find weird about Titan, of all companies, being the company with the Robotech comic book license. Titan is a UK-based publisher. The first I heard of them was when they were reprinting those Transformers comics in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, as I recall, maybe 2002, 2003. In any case, early 2000s. They've been around since the 80s, but, as they're like a UK science fiction book publisher, science fiction graphic novel publisher, I didn't have any reason to know who they were until they were reprinting, some of my favorite comic books ever in trade paperback form. But they didn't get into the periodical comics game until about 4 or 5 years ago, when they picked up the Doctor Who periodical comic license after IDW either did not renew or were not given the option to renew. I'm not sure which. They started publishing with ongoing series based on the David Tennant and Matt Smith versions of Doctor Who, and then Peter Capaldi's first season as Doctor Who started during that first year, and they started publishing comics based on him, and they just kept this Doctor Who thing going and going and going to the point that they overexpanded with too many titles, and they had to close them all down, which led to the weird situation for the last year or so of Robotech being their best-selling title. But what the weird thing is about Titan being the Robotech comic book publisher is, as I understand it, the United Kingdom didn't really get Robotech until the home video release of Robotech Remastered by Manga Entertainment over there in the mid-2000s. For the current home of Robotech Comics to have not gotten, Robotech until then. Still, the other thing to bear in mind here is it's been over 10 years. So it's long enough that there are people over there who would have nostalgia for Robotech Remastered, and then would go turn around and buy the new comics and feel nostalgic about the story. That just still feels so weird. It just seems so weird for Robotech Remastered to be that old now. But Furman, of course, wouldn't be nostalgic for it. Furman is coming into this stuff basically cold. He's presumably going back and doing his research and having to actually pick up this story as it goes and then interpret it in the comics. The difficulty with that being Wood's premise for the series, which is to basically do this as an interpretation of Carl Masek's vision. That's how it was promoted in the press. We're going back and we're presenting Carl Masek's original vision. Now, Carl Masek was a man with a lot of very peculiar ideas. And as far as I can tell, the key idea we're working from here is the old Masek time loop. Are you familiar with the Masek time loop? I think a lot of Robotech fans by this point should be, but if you're not, The Masick time loop works like this. Ultimately, the idea was that between Harmony Gold and Tatsunoko, working hand in hand, ultimately they produce enough new episodes of Robotech to basically give you a new episode of Robotech every single weekday for an entire calendar year. To the point that when you reach that last Friday ends with the Super Dimension Fortress crashing into the Earth, and then you loop back around to Booby Trap. How is this accomplished? There's some time travel involved. There's the SDF-3 becoming the SDF-1 involved. The plot mechanics are a little bit sketchy. And The End of the Circle, the final Robotech novel by Brian Daley and James Lucino, operating under the pen name Jack McKinney, provides an askew look at that. But it doesn't, happen to the letter. Menmei's final fate in that book kind of leans towards the Masick time loop, but it doesn't quite work. It's slightly askew, it's slightly weird. But ultimately, that is how Masick envisioned Robotech working. And by the end of the first arc, actually the opening of issue 4, if you're an observant Robotech fan, you see that this is actually in play. And in fact, Lisa at one point during the second arc straight up basically says to Roy, yeah, I know what you know. I know what you've been trying to do. And I've seen these secret files, and now I see that you're trying to tamper with destiny. In fact, basically, anybody who's been on board the SDF-1 or has seen the records of on board the SDF-1 has some notion as to where the Robotech story is going themselves. I'm not sure if I like that idea, but it's an interesting idea. Which is really something that can be said for a lot of Carl Masick's original ideas for Robotech. In this way, I guess the comic does adhere to Carl Masick's vision. We have, of course, barely scratched the surface here, but I think it's about time to wrap up for now. And next time, I do want to get a little into the nitty-gritty of, is the art good? Is the writing good? Spoilers, it's kind of all over the place, but I think it's getting better. So, this is Captain JLS signing off, and I will see you next week. It reminds me of Sentinels in that it's an adaptation that is veering wildly off course in a way that also allows for course corrections to get back on track and then, go off and do its own thing again. And it reminds me of Return to Macross because it features Roy Fokker doing decidedly un-Roy Fokker things, and Britai and Chiron butting heads in a way that is a little more confrontational than the original television series. And what's interesting is that all three have one thing in common that this shouldn't have in common with those, and that is T.R. Edwards.